Hi, welcome to this session of our program on accessing human rights. In this session, we will try to understand the concept of writ petitions from a more practical perspective. As you already know, the Constitution of India lists certain basic rights which are collectively known as the fundamental rights. While you have read about the evolution of the writ jurisdiction of the constitutional courts in the reading material of this unit, this video session will focus on the different ways one can access the fundamental rights listed in the Constitution. By now you know that fundamental rights basically include the right to life, the right to equality, to freedom, the right against exploitation, and so on and so forth. But when these rights are threatened, one must have access to a system that will enable the benefits arising from these rights. Therefore, the Constitution further recognizes the right to special remedies as a fundamental right by itself. In fact, the scope of authority that the Supreme Court and the High Courts can exercise to enable access to justice through such fundamental rights is vast and is constantly being revisited through subsequent jurisprudence. Remember that these are just the core rights enlisted in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has been giving liberal interpretations to each of the rights to effect a widened scope. The right to freedom of press, of information, and the right to education have all derived from these fundamental rights. When fundamental rights are violated, in some cases, one can directly approach the Supreme Court. This right to access fundamental rights is also considered a fundamental right under Article 32. Similar to the Supreme Court, the High Courts of the states also have extraordinary writ powers bestowed upon them through Article 226. Both Article 32 and Article 226 deal with enforcement of the rights of a citizen against the state. However, the scope of Article 32 is limited to the enforcement of fundamental rights, whereas the scope of Article 226 of the Constitution is much wider in application. As you can see, the High Court under Article 226 can give relief in case of tribunals and authorities even when the acts of such authorities do not infringe upon fundamental rights. But do note that the power of the High Courts under Article 226 is confined to its territorial jurisdiction, even where fundamental rights have been infringed. The Supreme Court, on the other hand, is competent to give relief under Article 32 against any authority within India. The Supreme Court can only enforce fundamental rights against a state. Thus, to claim a fundamental right from the Supreme Court, one must ensure that the court declares the body complained against as a state within the meaning of Article 12. And the court declares that such act was in violation of a fundamental right. Only when the court holds that such fundamental right was in fact violated by such state or instrumentality of the state can the court pass orders, decrees, or writs to rectify the wrongs or compensate the victim. Now that you know how to claim your fundamental rights, let's take a look at appropriate proceedings through which such rights may be restored. The Supreme Court rules provide some procedures to be followed for matters filed under Article 32. Here, habeas corpus cases have been isolated while all other writs have been grouped together. The general rule provided is that every petition shall be in writing. It also mentions that no court fees are payable for habeas corpus matters or for petitions arising out of criminal proceedings. For a more detailed study of the format of writs, do read the second study material to this unit. Well, let's take a look at the following landmark judgment of the Supreme Court. In this case, the Supreme Court accepted a letter on behalf of the victims of bonded laborers as a petition, while providing observations on what constitutes an appropriate proceeding for the purpose of enforcement of fundamental rights. The court made crucial observations, including that the rules undoubtedly lay down the procedure normally to be followed for making an application under Article 32. They, however, cannot limit the jurisdiction of the court to only the manner prescribed by the rules. The court will consider the substance of the matter and the nature of the allegations, as it is essentially a matter for the court to decide whether the procedure adopted is the appropriate proceeding within the ambit of Article 32 of the Constitution. Thus, we have learned that the Supreme Court can issue writs only for the enforcement of fundamental rights, whereas the High Court can issue writs not only for the enforcement of the fundamental rights, but also for any other purpose within its territory. We have also studied the procedure of seeking the remedies with the help of the Supreme Court rules and case law. Thank you for watching this video.